journalist.
Right. Well, he works for Channel 14.
Yeah. All right. So there's a lot happening.
Mm-hmm.
Let me start with updates on the shooting at the White House.
Yes.
So, all right. So News Nation just said the following: a man walked up near the White House with a pistol and fired three rounds. Before Secret Service returned fire and struck the man. A total of 2 adults were shot. One was not breathing while being transported. We know one of them is a bystander. Fox News: gunman was shot by Secret Service after opening fire near the White House. A bystander was injured in the shooting. The president is safe. So it seems that just someone random went up to the White House and took a few shots. We don't know of any casualties whatsoever within the White House. I saw another report that he did not even breach the perimeter. The Secret Service shot an armed suspect after gunfire erupted on the west side of the White House, according to Fox News. Secret Service then returned fire. Oh, there it is. Officials confirmed the suspect never breached the White House perimeter and Trump is safe. So that's on the White House. Then we have on the ORESHNIK missile fired and the ballistic missiles fired. A large-scale drone and missile attack is still going against Ukraine right now. Drones are mainly targeting the Kiev region. A Kinzhal was launched 15 minutes ago towards central Ukraine. Caliber cruise missiles are also expected, and we know that one ORESHNIK missile was fired as well from the reports. There's been multiple impacts, including ballistic missile impacts inside Kiev. So that's on the Russia-Ukraine front. And the latest update, which you were reading on the Iran deal front, according to my sources, an agreement will be reached in the coming days. That's Channel 14, Israeli media, journalists from there. Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz without charging any fees. The U.S. will not transfer any money to Iran at all. And that is very significant. Wow. Another 60 days for negotiations regarding the nuclear issue. The sanctions will remain in place, except for some easing of oil-related sanctions. Lebanon will also be part of the agreement. So according to this report, before we were seeing reports that Iran will control the Strait of Hormuz and money will be unfrozen, tens of billions of dollars, according to the New York Times and Iranian media. And now we're getting a report that none of these two are true, according to Channel 12, Israeli media. So these are the updates on
Channel 14.
Channel 14. What do you make of all this? There's a lot there happening tonight.
Right. So in the Iran one, I mean, the New York Times.
The guy in the White House. The guy in the White House was just armed with just a pistol, not a rifle or anything, just a pistol.
So I'll address the White House a little bit in a second. I think the Iran one is very significant. I think so. I think the first what we got was kind of Far's news agency after the deal, after President Trump through socials, basically, saying Iran is going to still manage the Strait of Hormuz, et cetera. And then we got the New York Times report citing Iranian sources saying, no, basically the Strait of Hormuz is going to open. No tolls are going to be charged. No fees are going to be charged. Everything was going to be open. So that was the New York Times, right, reporting that. But there was a key component there where we're getting vast agreements across the board. Let's talk about the areas where there's agreements. Lebanon is part of the ceasefire, which is very interesting. I think President Trump, though, the reasoning why I think he wants Lebanon to be part of the ceasefire and he's not against it is because he wants the negotiations between the Lebanese state with President Aoun and Israel and President Benjamin Netanyahu to continue. Because maybe in his mind, he thinks if I can get Israel and Lebanon to reach a peace deal, that in and of itself would have much more determinant effect on Hezbollah than any military operations that Israel can do, right? So I think that's why President Trump is more than happy to include Lebanon as part of the ceasefire, because he sees leeway and movement towards deals between the Lebanese state with President Aoun and Benjamin Netanyahu. So those are agreement across the board on all the reporting, Iranian, Arabic, Israeli, and U.S. The second one is the Straits of Hormuz. Outside of Iranian media, there looks like to be broad-based agreement that the Straits of Hormuz needs to open, and that Iran will not charge a toll or fees or anything like that or nothing. They're not going to do that. So now that's across the agreement, except Far's news agency, they said it would be managed. We don't know what that means. It does look like there's going to be free flow of commerce in the Straits of Hormuz. On top of that, from the U.S. side, the agreement is the U.S. is going to stop its naval blockade. There's broad-based agreement. Where there's a little bit of a confusion is part of that is that the U.S. is going to kind of pull out, the forces in the immediate area in the Middle East. Where the New York Times and even Al Mayadeen, the pro-Hezbollah media out of Lebanon, what that looks like it means is the naval forces that are imposing the blockade. They're going to be pulled out of the Straits of Hormuz and enable, free flow of commerce for Iran.
Let me
Where
just
there's
I'll stop you before we
yeah.
continue. Sorry, before we continue on that, a lot of people are asking for more information on the shooting at the White House. A lot of people are wondering about that. So before we go back to the Iran deal, let's kind of give a bit more insight into this, the timing of it as well. So I apologize for interrupting you, Steph. But because there was the reports before that Trump, JD Vance were all heading to Washington, D.C., along with General Kane, from what I understand, and other members of the administration were all heading to the White House in the last few hours as we got closer to the deal, which we're going to be talking about now, that Trump posted about. And then, so we all know that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, is there, and not sure who else is. Pete Hegseth is there. So everyone seems to be at the White House. And then we got a report. So what we know so far is that a shooter did, armed with a pistol, headed to the White House before breaching the perimeter, fired at the White House. I think he managed to fire 2-3 shots. And then the rounds of shots, by the way, Mike, if you can play that video from the ABC that we played earlier, the rounds that we heard from the ABC afterwards is the Secret Service firing at the suspect. And it seems the suspect was obviously killed. And we know that there is a casualty of a bystander as well. We don't know what their condition is, but we know one of these two people are killed, either the suspect, more likely to be the one to be killed, or the bystander. This is a video from ABC News. You can play it now, Mike. And then we know that the man, the person that shot at the White House, we don't know what they were aiming for, but they shot just with a pistol. What do you make of this and the timing of it as well? The fact that I have not breached the perimeter.
I don't.
What do you know about the security? What do you know about the security at the White House as well? Not sure how much you know there. I know there's snipers at the top of the White House as well. That's the video from ABC now. I think they're going to play.
Only for the two sides to remain far apart.
Start it again.
That President Trump has said a deal is close, only for the two sides to remain far apart. No.
We don't know who the target is, but it's just been the security situation when it comes to Trump. So many assassination attempts. Not saying this is an assassination attempt, that everyone's on edge. It's just been such a volatile and tense period since the
right. I mean, again, the perimeter wasn't breached. You know, we've seen instances in the past where gunmen approach, shoots at the White House, and they get targeted by the Secret Service. Everything that we've seen right now indicates that the security measures in place were exactly designed and utilized as they were should. We don't know the motive. We don't know if this was a target. I guess it's safe to assume that the target was the White House. And obviously we knew President Trump was at the White House with everything going on. I guess it's a safe assumption to kind of indicate that this was a targeted attack against the White House. But again, I think it's important to let the investigators do their work in the investigations. Who was the person who conducted the shot? What were the potential motives? Was the White House a target? Was somebody else a target? Was this a shooting that happened nearby? And that just was in the vicinity of the White House where things are happening. Again, I'm in the belief that, the White House was the target. Obviously, reminisces of the White House Correspondents' Dinner and everything that happened there. But again, we just don't know. I mean, this is very fresh, and I know that a lot of the listeners and viewers are trying to get more information.
We do know there's also, wasn't there a report that came in by the New York Post about an assassination attempt on Trump's daughter.
Ivanka Trump. Right, the New York Post. That's the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Look, the IRGC has had plans, and we know this extensively, have conducted plans to conduct assassinations against President Trump and other members, specifically related to his first Trump administration, in retaliation for the assassination of Julius Soleimani. We've seen the Iranians and both inside of Iran and political leaders in Iran announce bounties for the assassinations of President Trump and other rewards. Obviously, during the Biden administration, there was an indictment against that specifically laid out an assassination for hire plot against President Trump directly tied to Iran. The DOJ unsealed that during the Biden administration. So we know there's a long history, obviously, with the war and everything going on. It raises a lot of eyebrows. But, again, if Iran was going to do an assassassination plot, I'm going to be honest.
I don't think this
right, and I don't
think had anything to do with Iran.
Yeah. And I agree, and I agree 100%. And going up to the White House, the most secure building probably in the world, and just shooting at it is not a way. This, to me, indicates if the individual target was the White House, was somebody who probably either had mental issues, was radicalized, or something along those lines. An event occurred and decided to take matters into his own hand, or it could be in a situation like in a very extreme case, a suicide by cop. trying to do it in the most extreme way, in the most public way, in the most visible way to send a message. Again, these are all speculations. We simply don't know, and we just have to let the investigation take their turn.
From what we know so far, there's nothing really tactical about it. It's not a professional shooter holding a pistol, rocking up to the White House and shooting at the White House. Really, not going to yield any results. Exactly. So there is no, it's not like an assassination attempt, even if it's just a lone gunman. It's not an assassination attempt that's been planned for a long time. That's why I think the example you've mentioned of someone that could just be mentally unstable, rocking up to the White House, or somebody
just was radicalized. Yeah,
someone's been radicalized.
Like the White House correspondence dinner. I mean, that's another aspect as well, right?
Exactly.
Something like that. Yeah, unfortunately.
What do we know? Has any more information come out of that shooting at the White House correspondence dinner?
I mean, I think for the most part, we already know all the details that we really need to know. And that's kind of what the areas that we're going to see, and really not much else. We don't know, again, this shooting. I guess we're going to just keep on the lookout for reporting to see if the identity of the shooter becomes public knowledge. But I mean, that's right now. Again, we're just going to have to wait on the investigations. Obviously, I would be interested. Again, I'm not familiar with kind of the DC law enforcement landscape in the sense of who's going to be the lead investigative agency for this. Would it be the Secret Service? Is it going to be the FBI? But clearly these are the things. But it looks like, from all intents and purposes, that the perimeter established within the White House, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. And you can't stop an individual from pulling a gun and shooting outside of the perimeter. But if it's a threat, it looks like he was quickly neutralized in a very short order.
So before we go to I think what is the most important piece of news today is the Iran deal. I want to ask you just about the ORESHNIK missiles that were fired. If we could play the footage there. So what we know on that is that multiple missiles, I've mentioned their names, you probably know them because that's an area you've specialized in when working with the US military. I think that's the ORESHNIK warheads.
Yeah, those are the MIRVs, the independent warheads that they have. Like, yes, that's called the MIRVs. Yeah.
So first, I think this is the second time the ORESHNIK has been fired. It's been fired once a year or so ago as a warning shot to Kyiv. Oh, wow. Play it again. Sorry, with the audio. Play it again. Man, imagine living there and hearing that impact.
So what's very interesting about these, right? Again, the ORESHNIK was really designed for all intents and purposes for very long range, IRBM or ICBM, IRBM capabilities, which is very long range ballistic missiles. They're designed to have multiple it's one warhead with multiple inside warheads, right? And then that's kind of what you see. Those lights that you kind of see that are going through are all those individual smaller warheads that are going in and impacting the targets. And they were designed to really carry nuclear warheads, right? And so you would launch it, and then the nuclear warheads would kind of spread out to conduct, that strike in a large swath of area from one ballistic missile, multiple nuclear warheads, and they would all spread out and do it. What Russia's doing with the ORESHNIK, as you see, they're not. It doesn't look like, even when you're looking at the video, we didn't see any secondaries, right? So it looks like they're just using kinetic mass, right? There's no explosives in it. They just launch it, and then through the kinetic mass is what they did to conduct impacts with the psychological effect. And actually, if you look at the video footage, it doesn't look like it has a very large impact radius, right? They're all kind of concentrated in a specific area. So you go here, while speaking, those are the missiles that are going in, very, very, concentrated in a small area.
You can stop the audio, guys.
And so, again, from that perspective, we do know that Russia uses the ORESHNIK as a way for messaging and public messaging in many aspects. And I think that's why, right? What happened was, in the last couple of days, we saw very significant Ukrainian strikes. One of them, the Russians accused targeting a major civilian infrastructure that caused mass casualty event for this in the areas. And we did know that Russia has been after kind of that ceasefire for the May 9th and the parades, etc., tried to then retaliate for a lot of the aspects where Ukraine has conducted significant drone strikes. We saw Moscow continuously being hit by Ukrainian drone strikes in other parts of Russia. So clearly what this is kind of indicating right now is that, Russia wanted to send a message, and the ORESHNIK is the key message that's the key missile they use to send a message because it's kind of tied into the Russian nuclear program as well, the nuclear weapons program. And so by able to do that, they're able to send a message not only to Ukraine, but Europe, the United States, and the world as a whole of trying to show this nuclear messaging a deterrent and in many aspects saber rattling to see if they can get the message across. These strikes, though, have been accompanied also with other ballistic missiles. We got reports of the Kinzhal, which is an air-launched ballistic missile that the Russian military uses. A lot of people call the Kinzhal kind of this hypersonic missile. I think it's important to note it is a air-launched ballistic missiles. All ballistic missiles are hypersonics. It kind of fit within that category, nothing necessarily new. The Kinzhal has been widely used by Russia against Ukraine, and it looks like what we're seeing today is this ORESHNIKS strike coupled with this Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missiles, as well as there is reporting I'm seeing again initial that there's Iskander ballistic missile strikes, which is the standard Russian ballistic missiles, the SS-26, that are also being utilized. So what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, and it looks like the Russians are going to frame this as a retaliation for these significant strikes that the Ukrainians have been doing against Russia and territories, Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine. This is the response to it. And I think the ORESHNIK is the messaging. It is to get the world and the captivation of the world with these videos that are going out and being distributed. The world is going to listen. But again, the ORESHNIK from a ballistic missile capability and from even an IRBM perspective, I mean, that type of weapon system has been in existence for a very, very long time. Now, this is the most modern version of it, but it is the standard. It is a ballistic missile, and its technology has been in existence for decades. It's just a newer version of that. So clearly, the Russians wanted to. What
message do you think that they're sending, though? Because this is again a nuclear capable missile, and probably one of the most powerful.
The SS-26, the Iskander, which has also been launched extensively in this war, is also nuclear. You could put a nuclear warhead on the Iskander ballistic missile, right? So
but it's easier to intercept. Is it easier to intercept than the ORESHNIK?
And so the issue where the ORESHNIK has more, the benefit for the ORESHNIK is, as you saw in the video, it's all those smaller warheads that go. That's where it becomes difficult to intercept. That causes a difficulty for interception, right? That's the problem. So, but it's designed to kind of conduct strikes. It should be kind of utilized in a much more wider range. But the fact that they kind of, where you see the videos in the impact area and that small radius, as I alluded to, clearly then it's done. Yes, they probably targeted a military infrastructure, but it doesn't even look like those warheads have explosive warheads. It looks like they're just using kinetic energy. Shows that it's being done from a messaging perspective. And I think the reason why they're doing it is the message is maybe not necessarily to Ukraine per se, because obviously the Ukrainians are going to do whatever they want in this war, but it could be a message to not only maybe Europe or the United States to say, hey, you need to tell Ukraine to stop conducting these strikes deep into Russia, into Moscow against the civilian infrastructure. There's also a lot of internal domestic political pressure that President Putin is going in with, like, for example, the mill bloggers and people that are much more hawkish nationalists who are demanding more and feel like Russia's fighting with, their hands tied behind their backs, that they feel like they could be doing more. And Putin might be also doing this ORESHNIK strike as a way to appease kind of the Russian military bloggers. Or what say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. Yeah, go ahead.
So up to 18 caliber cruise missiles have entered Ukrainian airspace via the Kherson region. The Ukrainian Mirage 2000s and F-16s are airborne to help intercept the cruise missiles. How significant are the caliber cruise missiles?
So the caliber cruise missiles, those, because we got reports, it would be interesting to see where they were launched from. Generally, the caliber cruise missile are sea-based launched. Cruise missile, I mean, they're cruise missiles. I mean, in a way, you could think of it as like the Tomahawk, the U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile. So again, it makes sense that they're launching F-16s and Mirage for the Ukrainians because that's the primary method of intercepting cruise missiles, right? Generally, ballistic missiles will be intercepted primarily by air defense assets such as the Patriot, right? That's the primary asset to intercept ballistic missiles. Cruise missiles and drones are more in the lines of Air Force. Now, obviously, Patriots can intercept caliber cruise missiles and any type of cruise missiles, but that's kind of when you look at the integrated air defense systems and the IADs. When they launch cruise missiles, you generally send the Air Force to find them and try to shoot them down before they reach the target. But what it gets to, Mario, I think from a broader sense and zooming out, it shows this is a very complex attack. We have reports of ORESHNIKS being utilized, at least one. The Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile, which as I talked about earlier, which is the air-launched ballistic missiles. People call it hypersonic. It's important to note every ballistic missile is hypersonic, right? This is an air-launched ballistic missile. We also got reports of Iskander ballistic missiles, which is the standard SS-26 system that the Russians use. Now we're getting Caliber cruise missiles, which again indicates the complexity, multiple systems against multiple targets. And then it would be interesting. What I would end with, Mario, is we're probably going to get also reports of drones. The Geron 2, which is the Shahed 136. Yeah. So so this is obviously it's a complex attack, multiple system, multiple targets, Kyiv. You're saying it's crossing. So with the problem with cruise missiles, so a ballistic missile, when you launch it, because it follows a ballistic trajectory, you can basically calculate and have an idea immediately shortly after launch, either through satellite sensors or ground sensors and radars. You can more or less calculate the target pretty quickly, right? That's with the ballistic missile. That's why when you hear, for example, in Ukraine or in Israel, red alerts, ballistic missile launch in this concentrated area, they use those trajectories to calculate more or less. The problem with the cruise missiles are maneuverable. They're slower, but they're maneuverable. You can't really have you can have a general idea, but it's a larger swath of territory that when a cruise missile is launched, you can't do with a ballistic missiles and predetermine generally an area, and specifically somewhere the size of Ukraine, because they can go up, let's say, through Kherson, they can make a right, and then hit, let's say, Sumy, they can make a left. That's the power of a cruise missile. They're slower, but they're much more maneuverable, and they fly generally lower to the ground, and that's the design of it, because you're trying to defeat these air defense assets, these radars, from detecting it. With a ballistic missile, you have the speed and the quickness, but it's easier to kind of determine the trajectory and then to try to use air defense assets to intercept and destroy. So the ORESHNIK, the power of it is basically it launches at a very high altitude all those independent warheads. And now instead of you trying to intercept one missile, you now have to intercept, the amount that you saw there. You're going to have to try to intercept every single one of them, which causes a significant problem for air defenders, specifically in a munition perspective.
In terms of the ORESHNIK missile, what makes it so much more difficult to intercept? You talked about the warheads all, kind of having multiple warheads that are difficult to intercept each by itself, and then you've got also the speed of it. The hypersonic missile having the 5x, 5 times the speed of sound, according to some reports.
Yeah. So the speed of it, though, that's basically almost every ballistic missile, though, right? Like the Kinzhal is similar. So the Kinzhal. The main strength of the Kinzhal, it's an air-launched ballistic missile, right? So the ORESHNIK is a ground-based. It launches from the ground, goes up, and then it gives you that especially if you have radars or satellite, the problem with ground-launched missiles is you can detect it. You have that extra time between the launch and the booster phase to go up. With the Kinzhal, because it's air-launched, you're kind of reducing that early warning time from those couple minutes or seconds from early detection. And so now you have less time to detect it, and that's the power of the air-launched ballistic missile. The ORESHNIK's true strength is its warhead capability and its ability, as you see in the video, all those warheads going through. So the moment that the ORESHNIK launches it, we don't have the information, right? We really don't know. But what would be very interesting, what's the altitude that the ORESHNIK releases the submunitions that then go to the target? Because that altitude, if you're an air defender, you're trying to, basically have an idea. Can I do this where I'm intercepting one ballistic missile? Because I can intercept it when it's going up into the atmosphere. And so I try to intercept it before, because by the time it goes down and it releases its warheads, again, it's not one object you're trying to intercept. It's all these warheads. And you see the video. At that point, with just the speed of it from re-entry, from the atmosphere, Mach 10, 15, those smaller missiles, that especially that kind of looks like, again, they're utilizing kinetic energy to impact. It doesn't look like they have any explosive devices. I wouldn't be surprised if those are traveling at Mach, I'm not a scientist, but 10, 15, 20, good luck trying to, not only just from a speed perspective, it's just the quantity in of itself that's a problem.
In terms of these missiles, the Iskander, the Kinzhal, and the Caliber, they were all launched in this attack. How often is each one launched? And has there been other attacks that included all of those? There hasn't been any. There's only been one other attack that included the ORESHNIK. So that's only the second time. I thought there was two.
Is there not? There wasn't two, or is it this only?
I remember one that was. I remember one seeing the video with the multiple warheads. that was fired as a strike, I think, in response to the US sending more aid to Ukraine. That was a while ago. It was like a year or year and a half ago. I can't remember. And maybe there's another one I don't know of. But in terms of having that significant of an attack, including the Iskander, the Kinzhal, the Caliber.
I mean, if you remove the
ORESHNIK, how common is that?
It's more common. Generally, the vast majority of the strikes that we see Russia uses more of the drones, but they have also used a lot of their cruise missiles and their ballistic missiles. And the Russians throughout this war have been able to reconstitute and rebuild those capabilities, right? They launch missiles and they're able to reconstitute fairly consistently. So that's something that the Russians have really a significant advantage over the Ukrainians, right? Where the Ukrainians are probably, if not closing the gap, you can even make maybe an argument is maybe even improving is like the drone program. But if you look at cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, the Russians are leagues ahead of the Ukrainians. And that's when we see. So we do see those types of more fairly consistent. The new thing here that really is drawing a lot of this attention is, as you said, the ORESHNIK. I mean, regardless, that is a new feature. But the irony, if I may, Mario, if you're looking at these strikes, like to me, the ORESHNIK from an impact, military impact to destroy a target is not the one I would be looking at for today, because it's just like you said, it's very close radius using kinetic energy. What I would be looking at more is the Kinzhals, the SS-26, something like that, like those videos you're seeing there. The Kinzhal, the SS-26, and the Calibers in this construct probably have a bigger punch because of the explosive rounds that the explosive payloads.
That's the Iskander, by the way.
Is that an Iskander impact?
Yeah, that's the Iskander impact.
I mean, if you want to put the audio to just for our audience to listen to
do it again with the audio, please, Mike. What do you think the targets were?
I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, military, civilian, energy infrastructure. I mean, it's really. I mean, and it could be a government institute. It's really hard. I mean, obviously, in the end of the day, any explosions are that's what they want. But note that video with the Iskander, right? That has been identified in that report. How that explosion, and compared to the ORESHNIK, when the impacts occurred, you didn't see the explosion. Hence, that's what I'm trying to get at, right? Like, that's why the ORESHNIK launch serves more of a messaging perspective, because you're not seeing. They're not being employed, or those missiles are not having an explosive payload. So that's why I'm saying that's much more of a messaging component, specifically because the ORESHNIK is tied to Russia's nuclear program and nuclear weapons program. The Iskander, because it has that payload, can cause significant more damage. And so that's where now from this strike, the Russians are doing it both from a messaging perspective, but also from a military impact perspective. Now the question, Mario, I think is what you're saying. What are the targets that the Russians have targeted today? We don't know right now because it's happening right now, but that's what we kind of look at.
There's been Ukrainians said that they believe there was an imminent strike or possible strike by Russia. That was a few days ago on headquarters, command and control centers inside Kyiv. Have you seen those reports?
I mean, and that could exactly be it. We did see President Zelensky today say that American, European officials gave them intelligence warning that the ORESHNIK was going to be launched against them. So this was
that was preempted.
So we got the President Zelensky on his Twitter account or X account released a statement saying, based on American and European intelligence, very interesting American, so that shows that the intelligence sharing is still going on. But very interesting to say, there's going to be a significant strike today. ORESHNIK missiles are going to be, even ORESHNIK missiles are going to be launched, but it was going to be a very significant strike today. And then we saw the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv release a statement warning American citizens in Kyiv, hey, there's going to be a significant strike today, be prepared, right? So we were all waiting for this. We knew this was going to happen from President Zelensky and the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine releasing those statements, and now we're seeing what it is. So it wasn't a surprise, so it would be interesting to see, obviously, President Zelensky just released a statement telling to the Ukrainian people, like, hey, seek shelters. Obviously, if they knew these strikes were coming, they might have had an idea from intelligence reporting, hey, these are going to be the targets. So it might have given the Ukrainians an opportunity to prepare for it just in case.
Yeah. I'm trying to get more information on that. I want to go to the, there's no updates on the shooting. I think this is it, what we said earlier, just someone randomly rocking up to the White House, not breaching the perimeter, firing a few shots and getting immediately shot by the Secret Service. Apparently he's not deceased, by the way. He's in critical condition, but there's a bystander that was injured as well. Not sure if they were killed. So that's what we have on the White House. And we just gave you an update on the attack in Ukraine. One last question. What is going on the front line in Ukraine? There's been a lot of attacks on the Ukrainian side against Russia. I think there was a school, I've been paying attention to Iran, but there was a school that was struck in Russia with significant casualties that Putin was talking about. Do you have more information
Putin
on
said
that?
it was civilians. The Ukrainians said it was military. I think that was actually, and then there was another strike also. I don't know if it was that one or another one, but the Rubicon unit of the Russian military that was also hit, and the Ukrainians are claiming a lot of strikes against military targets, both inside of Russia, but also in, Russian-occupied Ukraine, a lot of the strikes. And I think that's why we saw that school one is why I think the Russians did this retaliation today, because of that strike and others. And so that's to be expected, right? What's very interesting in the front lines, I mean, even today, Rybar, which is, the pro-Russian military blogger, released statements that the Ukrainians are having tactical success in Zaporizhia, right? And kind of you look at the front line in the southwestern portion of the front line, the Ukrainians are able to gain territory, and they're being able to gain this territory because of Ukrainian drones are able to disrupt Russian logistics. April 2026, if you look at all kind of the map, a lot of the mappers and kind of the accounts that track territorial change, it does look like it was the first time in a very long time that Russia actually lost more territory than was able to gain for a while. Which
Institute of War, I think it was.
Institute of War, that was one. And there was others that kind of reported that as well, and other independent ones that kind of tracked this on their own. Regardless, I mean, it does look like at the tactical level, it does, maybe the Ukraine is having more tactical level success in some of these localized counteroffensive. And it looks like the areas where they're having the most amount of success is in Zaporizhia specifically. We've seen some smaller success, maybe in Donetsk earlier and stuff like that. But right now, at least for the last couple of weeks and couple of days, it's in Zaporizhia. But I think the problem right now for this war, which is very interesting because Secretary Marco Rubio said U.S. is no longer going to lead these negotiations. I think I talked to that with Ozzy in a previous episode we did yesterday when we recorded. Marco Rubio said we're not going to negotiate anymore, that neither side is interested in war. And I think, unfortunately, we're running into a situation of a significant stalemate. Now, again, stalemate doesn't mean the front lines aren't active. They're extremely active. There's a lot of movement. But a lot of the movements and changes is very tactical. And unfortunately, what this is kind of becoming historical comparison, right, is the Iran-Iraq War of the 80s, from 1980 to 1988, right? Where, yes, there were in some areas significant changes in territory, but for the most part, it was kind of that frontline, trench war, static frontline. And it's almost ironic that the Iran-Iraq War, we saw more changes of territory, and that war is kind of defined as the closest things to World War I since then, than what we're seeing now with Russia, Ukraine, that's having less territorial movement. And so what we're seeing right now in Ukraine is both sides kind of fighting extremely and expanding significant amount of casualties and resources for very small territorial changes.
So a quick question. Yeah. On that point, what a lot of people say is that in a war of attrition, and this has become a war of attrition, it doesn't become about territory. You keep fighting until, it's going to go stable, and then you see a complete collapse. A lot of people are talking about the Ukrainian military potentially being, some people obviously saying the other side, the Russian military is on the verge of collapse. More voices saying that about the Ukrainian military because of the manpower shortages. Now the stockpiles, the munition stockpiles on the American side are being delayed, not only for Ukraine, but also for Japan and for Taiwan. So putting all these together, the claim is that Ukraine is on the verge of collapse.
So so the only issue though is I disagree with that for two reasons. One, if that's the case, then this last month we wouldn't run into a situation where the Ukrainians gain more territory than the Russians. Where I think I'm going to address your point. Where the Ukrainians, though, from the manpower issues that has been very well known, how they've been able to adjust for that is the drones. To the point where now we've seen even multiple U.S. officials, even from this administration, the Secretary of the Army, general officers across the board within the Pentagon, all say that right now Ukraine is the lead nations in drone capabilities, right? And so what we've seen in a situation is where Ukraine has been able to manage the manpower shortages by expanding their drone capability, and then to the point where now a significant portion of Russian casualties are because of Ukrainian drones. not because of artillery, not because of infantry or armor units, it's drones. And what you're seeing the Ukrainians, how they transition their doctrine really is, we want the Russians to suffer as much amount of casualties, and they have to expend more resources for them to seize smaller and smaller amount of territory, right? And so it's almost like you can kind of look at a graph that the amount of Russian casualty continues to grow proportional to the amount of territory they're able to seize. So they need more resources to seize less territory. But here's the problem, Ari, to your point. I think the Ukrainians, with that, plus all these strikes that they're doing in Russia from an economic perspective, and even the ability for right now, some reports indicate that the Russians are suffering more casualties than they're able to recruit. And now these strikes on these economic assets inside of Russia, I think the Ukrainians, what they're trying to do is cause the Russians' will to fight to break. And one of the hardest things to measure in any warfare, Mario, is the will to fight for a military, right? It's a very difficult thing to assess and to get. We don't know if the Ukrainians are going to collapse first or the Russians. It's very hard until it happens. It's very difficult to kind of assess one way or the other. But the issue is that both sides, for the most part, are fighting this war in this idea that, well, one side is going to break because it's this attritional warfare, they're going to run out of resources, rather than take it from a consideration of says, how can I employ my military force and achieve and translate tactical level success to operational level success, and then operational success to strategic level success. We're not seeing the Ukrainians or even the Russians consolidate their militaries in a way to achieve maximum results from an operational maneuver perspective. And they're falling back into this positional, attritional warfare that unfortunately, as we saw, for example, with Iran and Iraq, lasted 8 years and neither side collapsed. And so I think that's a very faulty assumption, both for the Russians and even the Ukrainians. I can understand why the Ukrainians are doing this because of, maybe manpower issues, issues specifically with equipping, with, mechanized forces and motorized forces, et cetera. The overemphasis in utilizing drones to kind of mitigate their military and mitigate those measures. The Russians have issues, even the same, and especially professionalizing training their force, and all this. And so it's almost as both sides have gone to this type of warfare because they don't have any other choice. And so they're both trying to cause the other to collapse. And we haven't seen really yet any indications one way or another that either side is going to do that, which indicates to me that this is just going to continue in this state, this very intense attritional warfare for a very long time without either side, budging. Where maybe Ukraine has a leg up compared to Russia is we are seeing a lot of pressure on President Putin. There's some commentary, even from Russian military bloggers, that a year or 2 years ago seemed, impossible to think, and some of the criticism directed against that. Obviously, the Victory Day parade in 2026 kind of shows that the Russian elite and the President Putin is concerned about it. But then the question is, if something happens to Putin, you're not going to have a liberal-minded person who wants the end of the war. You might have even somebody more hawkish. But I think right now this
Prigozhin-like person.
And I think Zaporizhzhia is a key example where the Ukrainians are having tactical success and seizing some territory, but they're not able to translate that at the operational level in a breakthrough that can really change large areas of the direction of this war. That's the key aspect we're missing from both sides.
And then on a positive note, it seems that we have a deal that could be reached in when it comes to the Iran war. So Trump put out a post. He listed a lot of the Arab states, including Pakistan, I think Turkey, etc., Egypt as well. He listed all these states and announcing that a deal could be imminent tomorrow. He said there's a few things still being discussed, which is interesting. When you're still in the negotiations process, you don't usually declare victory because it puts you in a difficult position in the negotiations. But that was a statement that he made. Then we got different reports on what that includes. We had the report from the Al Jazeera journalist come in first, saying the deal, which seemed like capitulation for Trump based on that report from Al Jazeera. It said there's going to be an end to the war on all fronts, the unfreezing of freeing of several $1 billion of Iran's blocked funds, lifting of the U.S. naval blockade, and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the withdrawal of American forces from the immediate vicinity of Iran. So essentially, and also talks about Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz and charging a fee, and that the negotiations for the nuclear program will be discussed in 30 days. So that came in from the Al Jazeera journalist. Al Mayadeen put out a similar report. They said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. They did not mention about at all. And then we had a New York Times put out a report. They didn't say anything about the American troops pulling out of the region. They did say that the deal does include, from what I understand, Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, charging a fee at the Strait of Hormuz. So that was the latest report. And then we had a report from Channel 14, I think you said, which is one you read earlier. And that said that so it says the following: according to my sources, an agreement will be reached in the coming days. It will include the following: Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz without charging any fees, which is very significant. I think so. Hold on. The New York Times also said there won't be a fees at the Strait of Hormuz. They won't charge a fee. So the New York Times said that. And now Channel 14 said no fees at the Strait of Hormuz. But that goes a bit further, a lot further. That says the US will not transfer any money to Iran at all. But the way it's worded, won't transfer any money. Could it be? Could the money be unfrozen from another country that has Iranian assets? We don't know. So maybe that doesn't come out of the US because the Iranian assets are frozen across multiple countries. The US will not transfer any money to Iran. Another 60 days for negotiations regarding the nuclear issue. The sanctions will remain in place except for some easing of oil-related sanctions. And the war in Lebanon will end, or Lebanon will also be part of the agreement. So conclusion, we don't know what will happen in the Strait of Hormuz, whether Iran will control it and charge a fee or not. Different sources say different things. If they don't charge a fee, because Iran, by the way, Iran put out a statement. It's very important. The spokesperson for the foreign ministry, I think, put out a statement saying, or Fars News.
Yeah, Fars News.
Fars News, exactly. Yeah, Fars News said Trump's claim about return of the Strait of Hormuz to its previous state is not true, according to the latest revised text. In case of a possible agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will continue to be under the management of Iran. Although Iran has agreed to allow the number of transit ships to return to the pre-war level, this does not mean, quote, free traffic to the pre-war situation. Based on this, the management of the strait, determination of the route, time, way of crossing, and issuance of permits will continue at the sole discretion or responsibility of Iran. Therefore, Trump's claim in this regard is incomplete and does not correspond to reality. So Iran's news outlet is saying that Iran will continue controlling the Strait of Hormuz and will charge a fee. My guess is that I wouldn't be surprised if there is a fee. I'd be surprised if there is no fee, because Iran has kind of made it clear time and time again to their own people and to the world that the Strait of Hormuz is under new management and this is non-negotiable. They already have a website, they have an agreement, etc. They called it the Persian Strait Gulf. The Persian Gulf Straits. So that it'd be pretty embarrassing, including domestically, if now suddenly they capitulate on that point. So I think there is a fee at the Strait of Hormuz, but it will be shared between the Gulf countries and Iran. That would be my guess. And regarding the unfreezing of assets, I think there'll be assets unfrozen. But I do think the war in Lebanon, I think, will end. And I think the nuclear program, there won't be any concessions this time around. It'll be delayed for later. What do you think?
So I think the new management, I mean, the way they phrased it, though, they didn't even say toll. They just said management, right? That's okay. Here's the argument I would say. It's like
they
the
said
U.S.
no free traffic, just to be clear. They said no free traffic.
Okay. Now, what I would put, like, this is where I think that there's games being played. Because, for example, the U.S. has said we're not going to give Iran direct money, but then the report is, well, because all the assets that are seized from Iran, the $25 billion that the New York Times reported, Mayadeen said it was $6 billion. Again, the numbers is kind of fluctuating. Those are held internationally outside of the U.S. So the U.S. can just say, for example, Qatar has frozen assets. Okay, Qatar, you can release it. The U.S. is not giving that to Iran, right? It's just where I'm freezing it. Where I'm a little bit interested, though, is if the United States says the only sanction relief is a temporary oil sanction relief, specifically, that means it's an OFAC. More than likely, it's going to be tied to OFAC.
Yeah.
Which is under, we talked about this under the Treasury Department. If that's the case, if that's the only sanction relief that's going to happen, that's not going to touch the assets that are international. There would have to be more to enable these other countries to release those assets to Iran. So that's a key detail that we need to figure out and what that means. And that's a huge difference, right? Because if the U.S. says we're only going to give you some oil OFAC sanction relief, and that's it, it's really hard to then see other countries saying, we're going to release these frozen assets to
There are
Iran.
two ORESHNIKS were fired, not one.
Oh, two? That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Two is very interesting. Okay, that's
Sorry to
now
interrupt.
that's
Go
the
ahead.
first time it's multiple ORESHNIKS, because I think the last time was only one. So that's interesting development. And it shows that the Russians have been able, with the new system, sorry, just going to that, from being, I've produced enough of it and have enough operational and tactical level expertise to now launch multiple of those systems. So that's a significant kind of growth and development of what's going on. Having said that, with the Iranians and all that, we saw the Al Jazeera, I think Al Jazeera, if I'm not mistaken, reported that the Straits of Hormuz would reopen without a toll. And we saw a Mayadeen report that the Straits of Hormuz would reopen without a toll. The New York Times have reported that and the New York Times is quoting 3 Iranian officials. So we have a pro-Hezbollah news agency, a Qatari news agency, and a U.S. agency quoting 3 Iranian officials, all saying Iran is not going to establish a toll. Which, to your point, though, is a very interesting thing, because then the point is, what does Iran have in return? Because even if they get some sanction relief, even if they get some of the assets returned to them, it's not going to be enough to reconstitute a lot of this thing. I mean, it can give them some liquidity. It can maybe stop the bleeding of their currency, but it's not enough. It's not. There needs to be significantly more for the Iranians to continue to do this. So I think the loss, if Iran commits to reopening the Straits of Hormuz, which is right now the consensus in the reporting, we're going without tolls, then what we're going to is exactly like the Houthis. We're after the Houthi in Israel and Gaza. Everybody, the Houthis control the Gulf of Aden. Look at all this, and this ceasefire is weak, but they're the real controllers. They're the powerhouse. And they weren't. They weren't. And to the point where they didn't even get involved in this war because, I think there were significant concerns within the Houthis. We don't want to get involved in this after the latest rounds. We're not. If the Iranians completely open the Straits of Hormuz without charging a toll, which to me makes sense because I don't see President Trump or Secretary of State Marco Rubio or Vice President J.D. Vance or Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, or even the Saudis or the Gulf countries agreeing to this. If Iran agrees to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, that's a significant loss for Iran, and they lose their strategic deterrence.
It's a big concession, yeah.
And because they've lost their ability now also to do sanction evasion through the Gulf, specifically Dubai, because the amount of times that the Iranians have attacked Dubai, right? Dubai used to be, and UAE used to be a hub to enable Iran to do sanction evasion. We know this. It was a known fact. Now the UAE is viewing themselves as a direct rival to Iran. And if Iran is saying the Straits of Hormuz is completely reopening with no tolls whatsoever, time is not on Iran's side in that aspect. And the U.S. can say, okay, we stopped the naval blockade. All right, Iran, let's enter into negotiations. But now you have a whole large swath of countries that are saying, Iran, you've attacked us. You're our adversary. I'm not saying there's going to be a hot war again, but they've lost that strategic deterrence. They're isolated.
Well, there's always the possibility, just to be clear, they could always block it again. So even if they agree to reopen it,
but then war goes back.
Reopen it. You'd assume war goes back. The US doesn't seem to have any appetite for the war. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a walking away now. I don't think you're talking about weapons shipments being delayed for Taiwan, for Japan, for Europe. I just don't think going back into war is something that the Trump administration or any administration or the military.
I mean, I don't think there's an idea. They don't. I don't think they want to go. I agree with you. I don't think they want to go back to war. I agree with you. They don't. However, I mean, one of the key, very interesting quotes that I think people did admit from the CENTCOM commander in Congress, Admiral Cooper said, was that related to even the IRGC Navy, which is these speedboats. He said, historically, we used to see the IRGC Navy operate between 20 to 40 speedboats when they were doing operations in the Straits of Hormuz, targeting multiple vessels. So it was a large swath of speedboats. And he said, now we see 2 to 3, right? Mm. It's like the Gulf of Aden with the Houthis and the Houthis when they were targeting these vessels. And it's the same with the piracy when back then in 2010, 9, 10, 11, 12, right, when the Somali piracy. The huge aspect of this is the threat specifically for insurance company in the maritime world of this violence that then prevents vessels from operating unless there's either a significant military deployment to reopen it or a financial incentive to do it, right? The threat of violence is very problematic for the maritime industry. If Iran just says Straits of Hormuz are completely open, no tolls, no nothing, for them to try to reclose it, I would be interested in seeing where the U.S. says we pull out. We've already seen the UK, we've seen the French, we've seen the Gulf countries said, we want to commit naval forces into this area to enable this freedom of navigation. It would be interesting to see how the Iranians respond to that. But then for them to reclose it or announce a closure, you're inviting yourself to a significant wave of military operations where President Trump has stated in the Wall Street Journal report that he's willing to go back at it. I think the reason why he agreed to this agreement, and to be honest, I think a lot of Israeli media were freaking out at the beginning, but now that this is kind of, even now the Israeli media is saying, well, this is the agreement, there's a lot of argument to be made. It's like, well, outside of Hezbollah, this isn't a loss. Because Iran loses their strategic deterrence. They lose that ability to hold the U.S. and the world hostage to their own demand.
No, but they haven't lost. You're talking about losing the ability. The ability is still there. If anything, they've proven the ability. Them agreeing not to charge a toll does not mean them removing their ability to close the strait whenever.
No, right. No. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But again, they can say that. Right, but by that logic, the United States but the U.S. can redo the naval blockade, right? And then we're just back at it. The U.S. and Israel can restart military strikes.
Okay, yeah, but true. But of course, all that can happen. Israel would not strike Iran without a U.S. approval or U.S. support. The U.S. is not in a position to strike Iran. Again, the munitions have been depleted. The global economy, every economist I spoke to, cannot afford a long closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It would be catastrophic for the global economy. So I think there's, of course, they could do that, and they could strike Iran. They can go into a 5-year war. And destroy Iran's energy infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. But then what happens to the Gulf? Look at the amount of damage that the Gulf has already faced from all this. You got countries that
but even in Iran, but look at all the damage. But the same with Iran, right? Like, so for example, Newsline magazine did a great article talking about the Israeli strikes against the steel manufacturing that I don't think people have really covered that extensively. That directly impacts, in one way or another, has it impacted over 1 million jobs in Iran. 1 million jobs are connected to the steel manufacturing capabilities of Iran from an industrial perspective, right? And
I think Iran is suffering significantly. Yeah, it's just the question is how far Iran is. They feel when a country sees this as existential, they're willing to go a lot further than a country that doesn't really like. If Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, of course, it's not good for international law. It might set the precedent. Just to be clear, other countries do it. They charge a fee. The Danish Straits, Denmark charges a fee. Turkey charges a fee. Suez Canal, which is a bit different, but there's a fee charge there. Yeah, but it's man-made, so it's a bit different, that one. But I'm saying that this is a loss, but it's not something existential for the U.S. The U.S. imports, no, because
it is. I think not for the U.S., but I think I don't see a universe where because then Trump had lost something that was never an issue in the beginning.
Yeah,
right. This is where I said, I think, and I've said this in multiple. I think for Trump can claim a win in Iran if he says this, even if they don't manage to get a nuclear deal. I think the nuclear deal is
the attack is ongoing. There's explosions happening right now. Zircon missiles launched from Crimea towards Kiev.
That's a significant wave. Yeah, this is Russia's kind of response.
Another report: four Zircon hypersonic missiles struck Kiev, Ukraine just now. That's what struck, and Caliber cruise missiles. That is ongoing.
It's a significant strike. Like it's a very significant strike.
That's from what you're seeing on your sources. I can see you checking as well. It's looking like. Would you say that's one of the most extensive strikes Russia has launched?
It's really hard for me to say it's an extensive one.
The most. I'm asking, is it the most?
Like the most? It's hard for me right now to say is it the most extensive one? But it's a significant one. I think it's a significant one way or another. I think that I would be in agreement. It is a significant one, 100%. Like so.
And it's ongoing as well.
It is, yeah. That's what I'm saying right now.
At first, KH-101 cruise missile launched by Tu-95 strategic bombers entered Ukrainian airspace through Sumy. What do you know about?
That's the thing. We're going to see a lot of these as well. Yeah. We're going to see a lot of these.
But I thought
We're
the
gonna see-
attack
yeah.
ended.
No, I mean, again, but I mean, unfortunately, Ukraine has. I think a lot of people kind of ignored it because we were consumed with Iran, etc. But we have seen this. I think the ORESHNIKS strike made it much more significant. But for now, I mean, I would actually have to see a lot. I would have to see. We would have to see the total numbers, but we have seen Russia launch hundreds of missiles and drones and strikes on Ukraine in previous strikes. I think more people are looking into this because of the ORESHNIK perspective, but. Again, we don't know if this is what I mean. It is a significant strike. I don't think it's the largest one. I don't think so. It could be. We just need more time to get all the data. But I think the ORESHNIK is made people much more aware of it, which is exactly why I think the Russians did that.
Yeah, just looking at more reports. Could this be a one-off warning, or it could be a new phase for the war?
I think it's just a continuation. I mean, this is just a continuation of everything. Like, I would not read too much into it. There's not really much different than that's kind of what I was saying. But if I may, I'm reading this. I'm gonna try to pull this up because I just saw this right now. But it does. I'm trying to see if I can pull. I
can add you to the group with the producers if you want to send something there.
I'm trying to see. I don't know if I have it right now.
What is it? On the Iranian front, yeah. I think.
Yeah. So I'm trying to. So this is from Ali Golaki, a journalist in Iran, kind of connected to I believe it's some of the Iranian hardlines and kind of the regime perspective. So they were agreed by Iran. I'm just going to read it by joint agreement for the MOU between Iran and America. He said is the joint memorandum of understanding. He said end of the war on all fronts, reopening of the Straits of Hormuz by Iran in exchange for the lifting of the Strait blockade by America, release of a portion of Iran's frozen asset, $12 billion out of the $25 billion under discussion, diminishing the U.S. military presence around Iran, and then he said. And he said ambiguous. I think that subsequently we're getting is the naval presence that is enforcing the blockade, and then a 30-day opportunity for negotiations on the nuclear issues. All
right, man. I'm gonna wrap it up. Yeah. I think we've covered most things.
But it looks like I wanted to share that. From the Iranian hardliner perspective, because again, this is from them. They said they're completely reopened the Straits of Hormuz without a toll. That's why I wanted to share from the.
That's from an Iranian source.
That's an Iranian source, correct? Correct.
Oh wow!
But it said reopening the Straits of Hormuz, and the U.S. removes the naval blockade. It was a 1-for-1. And I've been saying this a lot in your channel.
But they've always said reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But the thing is, they reopened under new management.
No
did
toll.
They mention that in that one there?
They did not. So they just said on this. I mean, they just said reopening of the Straits of the Strait by Iran in exchange for lifting of the Straits blockade by America. It was a 1-for-1 Strait reopening.
But that means nothing about not charging a fee. They've said this before. They've said it many times. We're happy to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but they need to say explicitly without charging a fee, because they've explicitly said the opposite time and time again, including today, according to Fars News and according to Iranian sources. By the way, just to be clear, it's Al Mayadeen, which is linked to Hezbollah, and Al Jazeera, the journalists, both said the Strait of Hormuz. We'll find out. We can always guess. I think we'll find out tomorrow. It's obviously, as we both agree, that if there is no toll, that's a big win for Trump. If I'm not saying the whole war is a win, I think the war is a massive loss, but at that particular point is a win, because I thought it would be impossible for Iran to walk that back. And if Iran charges the fee, that's a massive win for Iran. But we'll see. Steph, pleasure to have you again, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Mario. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. All right, guys. I've a lot of interviews today, a lot going on. Always nice for Steph to jump in last minute to kind of break down what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. The shooting in the White House, by the way, the suspect is now confirmed dead. But there's not much to it, just a random person, apparently mentally unstable. I saw a report somewhere who's had, there was some information on him earlier. He's mentally unstable. I think he's had issues with the authorities before. And just rocking up to the White House and shooting with a pistol. He was shot On the Iranian front, we seem to have a deal. We don't know the terms, getting conflicting reports, but that's really good news. On the Russia-Ukraine front, not looking great. Very significant attack by Russia that is ongoing. It seems in its final stages right now. And we'll be updating on my X account, sending all the news. But I hope you appreciated the coverage today, guys. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you.